Chapter 21 Challenge. Several years ago, I was invited to deliver a sermon at the Yale Divinity School. As I headed out the door that morning, at the last minute, I decided to grab the small framed sign that sat on the front hall table. "Life begins at the end of your comfort zone," it said. Yes, this would be the perfect opening to my sermon. As students and faculty gathered, I watched as Marquand Chapel filled with some of the smartest people on the planet. My imagination began to run wild. The intellectual firepower in that room exceeded that of all the reformers of the 16th century. The walls of the chapel oozed with the wisdom of noted Yale professors, the likes of H. Richard Niebuhr, Roland Bainton, and Henry Nouwen. Suddenly, sitting there in my black clerical shirt, bishop's cross, and mid-level suit from Joseph Bank, a slow panic set in. My sermon notes lay on my lap, and as I looked it over, I realized I had no footnotes, no quotes from significant theologians, and few multisyllabic words. The prelude being played by the small musical ensemble began to sound like my swan song. Thoughts raced through my brain. Who are you to think you can say anything to these people? What kind of an impostor are you? If you pretend to fall over and fake a dramatic illness, you can probably get out of this whole endeavor. The seeds of doubt and dread had been planted a few days earlier with the arrival of an email from a former Yale student. "Bishop Hazelwood, I heard you are going to be speaking at Yale next week. Years ago, I heard presiding Bishop Hanson preach one of the best sermons I've ever heard in that same room." "No pressure." Smiley face. Okay, so that was helpful and encouraging. And now, sitting in the front pew in a full-throttle panic attack, I looked down at my small-framed sign. Life begins at the end of your comfort zone. I was living my message. Most Americans identify public speaking as their number one fear, followed closely by fear of snakes, insects, and small children. Yes, I made the last one up. In reality, the list of our worries goes on and on. You could probably generate a top 10 list right now in less than 30 seconds. Even the calmest, mild-mannered people have fears, and many others live in a state of chronic anxiety. Did you know that when you are afraid, you are practicing everyday spirituality? "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom" is a well-known proverb from the Bible. Fear is a universal human attribute, and it's also a common word in the Bible, appearing over 365 times between the Old and New Testaments. Its use is quite varied. On the one hand, fear refers to an unpleasant emotional response to danger. Yet the word also means awe or respect. One thing is evident in these readings. Fear is not about dread, which is that anxious sense of impending doom. Fear seems to hold the tension between fright and honor. One thing seems to be clear. There is a connection between the fear or reverential awe of God and knowledge of the Holy One. Perhaps fear is not the best word to use in this context. What we are talking about is a spirit of adventure. That's the end of our comfort zone. Life is an adventure. Sure, there's an aspect of fear involved in any new experience. Think back to some of the most significant moments of your life. They are often moments where you had a bit of fear before setting out on a new adventure. Marriage, having a child, starting a new job, moving to a new community. These all involve moving out of our comfort zone through a state of fear and on to an adventure. We enter into these times with courage and resolve. Yes, indeed, you have courage. More of it than you think, I suspect. When you faced new chapters in your life, the only way forward involved courage. I'm fond of the work of the author Brené Brown on this subject. She writes, "Courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen." It's not only when we are afraid that we are exercising everyday spirituality, but when we enter the fear, proceed through the end of our comfort zone, and engage in courage, we demonstrate yet another form of spirituality. We do this more often than we realize. Karen wrote to me about her long struggle with agoraphobia, an anxiety disorder that causes people to avoid places and situations that might cause them to feel trapped or panicked. In Karen's case, it was a fear that limited her ability to travel beyond the boundaries of her hometown. She told me that this had developed more recently as she aged. Her story is long and complicated, and included multiple attempts to address her condition with doctors and through various experimental treatments. She desperately wanted to muster the courage to travel because she wanted to visit her grandchildren. Eventually, her minister suggested a spiritual director. After postponing this decision for years, she finally met with a spiritual director named Katrina, who helped her see her fears differently. Instead of resisting fear, she was encouraged to enter into it. Through prayer, spiritual conversations, readings, and active imagination, Karen slowly gained the courage to dialogue with her fears. She wrote, "I realized that I had been fighting and resisting my fears. Katrina helped me see my fears as a gift to me. I began, and I know this might sound crazy, talking to my fears. Yes, I had conversations with my fears. The more we talked, the more I understood them. Slowly, this allowed me to go on short drives to a restaurant in the town next door, then eventually an overnight. Finally, I made the trip, just for one day, to my grandchildren. Oh, I've had setbacks, and it's not all roses, but I'm able to travel more than I used to. I finally realized that I could trust God to be with me in my fears. I wasn't abandoned." Karen's story is a remarkable testimony of courage. With the help of a wise guide, she was able to face her fears rather than run from them. Many of us in the United States have what we might call a somewhat comfortable life. In the grand scheme of things, we've got it pretty good. We have a relatively high level of stability when compared with many nations around the world and with people throughout human history. The downside to that comfort is a kind of sameness to life. Life has become a bit predictable for many of us. Maybe those of us who are comfortable need a challenge. I'm advocating we take a slight adventure into the uncomfortable. Why? Because I think when we get out on that limb, even if it's just a little bit of a stretch, we discover something about ourselves, and most especially something about our experience of God. What mild adventures could you consider? Periodically, we need to do something hard. We need a challenge, whether that's physical, emotional, intellectual, or relational. We human beings are made better by trial. This is as simple as the fact that gravity is a force that challenges us every morning when we get out of bed. That force of physics is having a positive impact on your well-being. As it exerts an effect on you, you're required to respond and push against it just to get up and go to the bathroom. You are stressing your quadricep and your gluteus maximus muscles. The challenge to those muscles makes you stronger. Am I saying that getting out of bed in the morning is an experience of everyday spirituality? Yes. I think you're catching on. But let's take it a little bit further. I'm suggesting that with a little intentionality, you can choose to do something hard and make that challenge spiritually real. Is there anything in the Christian tradition that would speak to this subject? St. Francis had quite a time getting his ministry established. He faced resistance from many around him. St. Teresa of Avila had to fight to create a new order and a revived spiritual practice. Martin Luther had a few challenges along the way. Dorothy Day experienced resistance to her Catholic worker movement, while Oscar Romero's advocacy in El Salvador cost him dearly. And there is this. Then Jesus told his disciples, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." Matthew 16:24. Challenge, as I'm reframing this topic, is a part of the Christian life. We know that intellectually, but we so often resist it. Sure, we'd like to be in better shape physically, but that means we'd need to make some sacrifices, eat better, and exercise. I know I'd like a better paying job, but do I have to work to improve my skills, get an education, and put in more effort? I want to be a better cook, learn fly fishing, perform in a local theater company, learn to speak Spanish, build a house, hike the Appalachian Trail, but there is no but. There is only the challenge before us. Just do it. A compelling story is attributed to the Swiss psychologist Marie-Louise von Franz, one of Carl Jung's early students. While at a speaking engagement on women's psychology, though I think the story applies to men as well, she said, "Every woman has, perched on her shoulder, a little animating voice that's always talking to her. Whenever the woman steps out to do something, to initiate some new venture, this voice wakes up and says something like, 'And who do you think you are to attempt something such as this?'" During the question and answer period, a woman in the audience, referring back to that little illustration, said, "Well, is there anything you can do to get rid of that voice?" "No," von Franz responded, "but you can educate it." In August 2015, my friend Kurt and I rode our bicycles from New England to Cleveland, Ohio. We traveled 70 miles each day. It took us a week, much of it over the Erie Canal bike path. We spent most of our evenings camping, and most of our meals were eaten along the side of the road. Okay, we did enjoy a few great breakfasts in classic American diners, and that one night we grabbed a hotel room before a torrential downpour was a smart move. But when you are riding a bicycle saddled with 40 pounds of clothes and camping gear, your mind focuses on the basics. When will we eat next? Where will we sleep tonight? And will there be a shower? It was a sweltering summer in 2015, and although I had trained well for the ride, I don't think I appreciated the toll the ride would take on my body. By the time the hills, yes, hills, to the east of Cleveland were upon us, and I was cramping up from dehydration, I knew I'd met my match. But we pulled into Cleveland Heights, found our destination spot, and I collapsed. This trip was one of the hardest things I had done in many years. And yet somehow, in my exhaustion, I was also finding great joy. Whatever the challenge that lies before us, the truth is it will be hard. If the challenge were easy, then everyone would do it. Everyone would be a best-selling novelist, a professional ballerina, or a master carpenter. Perhaps there is something in the very nature of facing the challenge, thereby discovering the courage. I'm suggesting that embracing the challenge is an act of everyday spirituality. Here's a suggested list of challenges. Pick one and do it. You'll be in good company with those saints of the challenge, and you'll discover the courage to take it up. Learn to swim. hike the Appalachian Trail, learn to play a musical instrument, write a book, learn woodworking, become a potter, coach a sport, build a boat, read the complete works of Shakespeare, visit all the baseball parks in America, travel in a foreign country, study a foreign language, attend a cooking school, rebuild a motorcycle or an old car, build a shed, take a class in acting or stand-up comedy, write some poetry, go skydiving with a friend. If life does begin at the end of our comfort zone, as I indicated to those students and faculty at Yale, then maybe everyday spirituality also begins at the end of our comfort zone. Certainly the Yale Chapel attendees reminded me of this when, following the worship service, one said to me, "I'm trying to figure out just how uncomfortable I really want to be in this life." Thanks. You gave me courage today.